So if everyone is more or less ready, go ahead and get started with our hands-on exercise, which, as I said, is going to be mostly a tour at first. So hopefully everyone has found their way to the anvil.terra.bio homepage, is fully logged in. And we'll start by pressing this hamburger menu button at the top so that you can see your left-hand menu. And I just want to start by pointing out some of the general things that you'll find under your name in the profile section. Actually, I guess this is specifically the profile section, but all of these things are a part of your own profile. So this is where you would go to find information like your proxy group ID, which might be useful for setting certain types of authorizations. Groups is where you will go to set up which authorization domain related groups you're in. And I'll show you when we are actually cloning our workspace where you would put in the authorization domain as you're cloning the workspace. But to create an authorization domain, you would come here. And an authorization domain is basically like a laboratory badge. So you can think of it as an added security feature where in order to be able to access a workspace that is protected under an authorization domain, you need to be included in that authorization domain. And it's really that simple. Without the authorization domain, you can see any workspace that got shared with you. So I'll show you where in the interface you click to share a workspace that you own with someone else. And I'll explain again at that time that if you share a workspace that is protected under an authorization domain with someone who is not in that authorization domain, they will get the link in their email inviting them, but when they click that link, they will not be admitted into the workspace. They will get a message saying that it is a restricted access workspace, and they will be told that they have to contact you as the authorization domain's owner. This is also where we go to find our billing section. I know that everybody's already been in there creating their own billing projects. And one thing that I do want to point out to everyone is that this is where we find the list of notebook runtimes that we've created in any of our workspaces. So if I were to click here, you'll see I actually only have two under the Anvil branded Terra. So I've created these two notebook runtimes in the past. Every time I go into a workspace and create a new notebook runtime, it will be populated in this list. And I can do things like delete my notebook runtimes from here. I can see what status they're on, and I can see a real-time cost estimate. So if you, for example, are creating a lot of clusters and are finding it hard to keep track of whether or not you've paused all of the clusters that you created, you can go to your notebook runtimes and find a list of all of them, including information about whether or not they're running and how much they're charging you. And we'll come back here at the very end to delete the notebook runtime that we'll create as part of the demonstration. So before I hop over to the workspaces, I'll just point out really quickly the library and the support section are also places where you can find a lot of information on different types of workspaces. I'll again come back to these at the very end of the tutorial just to show you what's contained in our library showcase section, but basically it's a whole bunch of workspaces filled with featured workflows and code, lots of stuff for you guys to explore. And the support section includes a whole lot of different resources, many of which will help get you accustomed to the concept of the workspace. So all that being said, let's go ahead and jump over to the Your Workspaces section. This section always takes a little bit to load up. There it goes. And right away, you'll notice that there are a few different subcategories up here. And these show you what types of workspaces you have access to. So you should only probably have a few under my workspaces, but your new and interesting featured and public workspace number should be the same as mine. New and interesting workspaces are ones that we've been releasing recently for basically the very timely topic of COVID-19. In the future, these new and interesting workspaces may include other timely topics. In addition to those, we have a whole lot of featured workspaces. And again, I'll show you around that section of the library later to give you a better idea of what sorts of work is featured there. Featured workspaces are not to be confused with public workspaces. So obviously all featured workspaces have to be public access, but there are lots of public access workspaces that aren't necessarily part of the featured workspaces, but you can go ahead and look at those because they are set to public access. You can search through all of these using either the filters up here. So these are very convenient. In particular, the access level tag I find very convenient because I have, as you can see, a lot of workspaces that I have some access to. So if I were interested, for example, in only the workspaces that I have an owner level access to, I would set an owner filter here. And now you can see my 1100 workspaces went down to 150. Another very simple way to narrow down what shows up in your list is just to start typing in a part of the workspace name if you know it. And that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to ask everybody to type in some version of MaGIC Jamboree. You can see as soon as I type in JAMB, I see our Anvil Jamboree workspaces. And I'll direct everybody to go to this public-facing version of the MaGIC Jamboree 2020 workspace. And this is the, I'm gonna pause for like 30 seconds and ask by show of hands for people to click once they've gotten to this view to make sure that we're all on the same page. I see a lot of questions in the Slack. I don't believe these are case sensitive. No, they're not. They're not in the Slack, I'm sorry, the Zoom chat.
Would you mind backing up one page, Anton, to show how you found that and pointing out where others may be seeing different workspaces listed?
So the simplest way to see this workspace is to click on the public subcategory and then start typing in something like MaGIC or Jamboree. And you won't see it pop up automatically under my workspaces until you've created your version. In case anyone's wondering why I do see both of these under my workspaces, the reason is because I am listed as an owner on both of these. So you won't be listed as an owner on the public-facing version, but you can see right here the workspace information, and under owners it lists who the owners of this particular workspace are. So the fact that I show up as one of the owners is why I see this workspace pop up under the My Workspaces list. So we'll go ahead and start by cloning our own version. This is the most important basic step of using a Terra workspace. A Terra workspace, by the way, I'm sorry, I should have probably said this earlier. The entire concept of the workspace is that it's a reproducible digital laboratory. So I myself, I come from a chemistry background. So the way that I think about it is if you imagine the reproducibility issues that have to do with running a wet lab, they're enormous, right? I can't make a perfect copy of one wet lab and give it to somebody else to make sure that all conditions are exactly right. Fortunately, with computational work, you can do exactly that. And that's what a workspace is. It's a digital laboratory that you can clone as many copies as you want, so you can revert to whatever version of it you want, and you can share whatever exact version you want with others. So right now you're looking at a public version of the workspace where you can't do very much of anything other than look around. So you can't launch any computation here because you don't have that level of access. You can do it very easily by cloning your own version. So go ahead and click this three-dot menu button at the top right and click on the clone option. And it'll bring you this pop-up window where you will select the appropriate billing project. So I'm going to pick this one. Everybody else will pick whatever one they need. There's a short description here. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it's a short description. This is actually the description from the dashboard that you can see over here. And there is a place to select an authorization domain. So we won't be doing this in this case. We don't need to. We don't have any need to secure any of the work that we're doing behind an authorization domain. But if you wanted to, this is where you would do it. So I'm going to. Yes.
Would you mind highlighting that the billing project that our participants see may be different from the billing projects listed under your account?
Yes, you will see whatever. So you can see these are the billing projects that I have access to. One in particular that I like to point out is my free credits project, which has long since expired. Incidentally, I know that we haven't emphasized very much that we have a free credits program, but it is something that is very useful. We have you all should see a banner in your Terra interface suggesting that you sign up for the free credits program. It's $300, or it expires. So it expires after you spend $300, or I believe. Now I forgot what the time span is. Maybe Allie, can you remind me when it expires? Was it 30 days or 6 months, something like that?
I think it is 90 days.
90 days. That was it. Yes.
I believe so.
I double checked yesterday and it's 60. So
yep.
Pardon me.
Yeah, no worries. I think they changed it pretty recently, but it is 60 days.
Okay.
So I'll be using my product demo billing project. Everybody should use whichever billing project is most appropriate to them. Don't bother specifying an authorization domain. And go ahead and click Clone Workspace. And I'll just point out before I do that here you see the list of the owners. And when I click Clone Workspace, actually it won't work at first because I already have a workspace named this. So when I was preparing, I already created a MaGIC Jamboree copy. So I'll just do copy. And just so everybody knows, you have to have a unique workspace name per workspace per billing project. So if I were on another billing project, I could create another identically named MaGIC Jamboree 2020 copy. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And now you can see we are now working inside of our own copy. I am the owner. This is where I can share access to the workspace with others. So I would add another person's email or add an entire group. I would specify what type of access I expect them to have, and we have pretty granular control over which types of access you have. You can either be able to see a workspace or run computations in it or share it with others, and you can control most of this stuff pretty granularly. So now I'm going to give a quick tour around the workspace, and I'm really going to try to do this as quickly as possible because I can see that we're running a little bit behind on time. So first up is the dashboard. This is the front of the workspace where you'll find lots of useful information. I'll point out really quickly that this entire dashboard is a big markdown space. So I won't pause for the answer, but by show of hands, I was just wondering how many people are familiar with Markdown. You can see if I click on this little pencil icon, you can see all of the unparsed Markdown. And if I go all the way to the bottom, then I can parse it by clicking Save, and it will all come out formatted in the Markdown format. It's nice and beautiful, very easy to work with. Some typical types of information that you will find in a dashboard, obviously description of the contents, hopefully some directions on how to use them. Also, things like recommended runtime environment configurations. So we'll actually create a runtime environment with these exact configurations, and you'll see how we do that in a moment. And also things like this. So I think this actually addresses one of the questions I noticed in the Slack channel. Someone asked in the Slack channel if it was possible to track the cost of individual tasks. I don't know if they got any additional detailed answer. I know that one thing that you can do to at least track the costs of entire workflows, and of course, I guess you could create a workflow that just contains a particular task to see how much it costs to run a workflow with that task. And in a well-documented workspace dashboard, you'll find information like this, or for example here, where it will give you an estimate of both the time and the cost of using any of the tools contained inside of the workspace on certain sizes of input files. So that's the dashboard. The data tab is where the data slash the metadata lives for any type of work that you do in the workspace. So you can see under the tables section, we have these tab separated value tables in which we have both a whole bunch of attributes for all of these participants, and some of the columns in these tables actually contain links to Google Buckets. And so this is how Terra accesses information to different numerical values in attribute columns, as well as to different files that are contained in various buckets. The data section is also where you can find reference data. So in this case, there isn't reference data in this particular workspace, but this is where you could add it if you needed to. This is also where you can access your workspace data, and where you can look at the file tree for the various things contained, for example, in your notebooks. The Notebooks tab I'll come back to in a moment, since this is where most of the hands-on presentation will be in. Actually, you know what, since we're running a little bit behind, let's start here so that we can start our notebook configuration, our notebook runtime, in case it takes a little bit longer. So go ahead and open one of these notebooks. These notebooks are more or less identical. The completed notebook has all of the output fields already in place, whereas the cleared notebook has all of the outputs blanked. So if you don't want to see the answers before starting, then go ahead and click on the cleared version. But either way should be fine. So again, you'll notice when I open it, it starts by generating a read-only preview version. And so again, this is something I can't really interact with. I can't submit any of these cells for code. I can only read through this. And we implemented this for convenience because sometimes it takes a few minutes to actually start up a notebook, and it becomes really inconvenient to have to wait a few minutes to start up a notebook only to realize you've opened the wrong notebook. So this is a little convenient feature that we've added. The other useful thing about it is that you can see if such a chart is added into the notebook, you can see the runtime values that are expected for this notebook. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go to this notebook runtime environment configuration menu, and we're going to put all of these parameters into our configuration. So this particular notebook expects this Hail environment. And Hail is Hail is a system for basically parallelizing your computation, and you'll see exactly how this benefits us in this notebook. So once you select the Hail version, make sure that you select a custom compute profile. So that should give you a few more options over here. Make sure to set all of these to the settings that are recommended. So we'll do 8 CPUs. We'll leave it at 30 gigs of memory. Make sure to increase the disk size from 100. I believe the default you're seeing is 50. And then in this runtime type option, make sure that you select Configure as Spark Cluster. And once you do that, make sure to increase your number of workers to 4. You can leave preemptibles at 0. And the CPUs should also be 4. And everything else, I believe, can be left exactly as it is. And increasing the workers to 4 is the thing that will specifically allow you to take advantage of Hail and Apache Spark to parallelize this work. So we'll run this notebook right now. I believe it only takes 4 or 5 minutes to run. If you set these, I ran it earlier just to check how long it takes if you don't change the number of workers. So if you forget to change the number of workers, this notebook takes about 20 minutes to run, whereas it should only take 4 or 5 minutes. And you can see a cost estimate right here. So the cost estimate is always updated in real time. I'll go ahead and press start. You can also automatically cause the notebook to begin starting up by just clicking the edit mode or the playground mode. And that, by the way, where you saw there was an edit mode and a playground mode, is where you would choose between the 2 options that I mentioned earlier. So I'm now opening this notebook in edit mode, which means that if I were to share this exact workspace with you, you could still go into this notebook, but you would only be able to see either the read-only preview or open it in playground mode. And then whatever you do will not be saved. So you have to make sure if you're working in playground mode and you've done something that you think is particularly useful, that you find a way to save it, since it's not getting auto-saved to your virtual machine. So this process can take a couple of minutes. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and finish our little tour of the interface. So I'm going to close this notebook by pressing this X button. And you'll notice that my runtime environment is still starting up, so that doesn't affect it. Once I have decided to start up this runtime environment, the virtual machine is getting spun up one way or another. So that's happening in the background. While it does that, I'll just point out the workflows section is where we'll be doing our next hands-on exercise. And the workflows are basically the counterpart, the alternative to the interactive analysis. We host basically these 2 types of analyses. One are batch workflows that you submit to the Cromwell execution engine, and the other are interactive Jupyter notebooks. And once you launch one of these workflows, you will see a record of that job in the job history tab. So obviously this job history is going to be empty since I only just created this workspace. I can see that my notebook runtime has started running, so I can come back to my notebooks tab and open whichever one of these I feel like. I'll go ahead and open it in edit mode. And so here I do need to pause for like 30 seconds and make sure everybody's on board. So once you are looking at an edit mode of your notebook, go ahead and raise your hand, either edit mode or playground mode. I just want to make sure that everybody's cluster is successfully started up and they can open their notebook. And actually, for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and tell everybody whose notebook has already started. to just go ahead and run the entire notebook, the way we do this is by going to the cell menu and just running all. You'll notice as soon as I click this, my entire active table of contents will turn red because all of those steps will now be queued up. So there, you can see each one of these steps is now running one by one. So I'll describe to you the notebook in just a little bit more detail while that's going. Great. So this is our Jupyter Notebook interface that we've implemented on Terra. There's a few very convenient buttons that we've made sure are here for sake of convenience. For anyone who's not that familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, I'll just quickly explain. You can see here each one of these individual cells in the notebook. So the notebook is composed of these different cells, these individual cells, and the cells fall basically into two different categories. They are either markdown cells or they are code cells. If you double click on a cell, it becomes editable. So if I double click on one of these markdown cells, it turns into the unparsed markdown format. If I then run that cell with this button, it will parse that markdown code. And the same thing is true for code cells. So you can see here when I select this cell, the label in this menu turns to code. You can see here it's markdown, here it's a code cell. And if I were to change this to a markdown cell, I wouldn't be able to run this cell, obviously, because these are not markdown formatted cells. When I have code selected, the cell will be sent to whatever type of kernel you have set it to work with. And we have a number of different kernel options. Kernels, for those who are not familiar, are the base operating system on the virtual machine. And the virtual machine, in this case, can have different types of kernels. You can see which kernel you're working with right here. This symbol up here also indicates whether or not the kernel is currently busy. So if I mouse over it, it should say kernel busy. I think it doesn't right now because I'm in screen sharing mode, but you'll notice something like that. If you mouse over this symbol when this dot is full, it will say kernel busy. Once all of these computations have completed, it will turn back into an empty dot, and when you mouse over it, the label will say kernel idle, which means it's ready to do something else. We have a number of useful options for doing things like restarting the kernel. So this button right here, again, if you mouse over it, not in screen sharing mode, it will tell you exactly what it is. This button restarts the kernel. This button, I believe, restarts the kernel and reruns the entire notebook. Again, this is the menu where you can control aspects of your kernel. This cell menu is also very useful. I just demonstrated using the run all function, but it's also pretty useful to be able to run all of the cells above or below the cell that you've selected. This is also where you can go to clear the outputs on a given cell. So for example, you can see here, I have the output of this cell and I've selected that cell. So if I go to the current output and press clear, it goes away. You also noticed that there was a number here, and I'll just move down to where our cell is still currently working by clicking on the red items in our active table of contents. So these are the ones that are still set to run. And you can see that instead of a number, there's an asterisk. And the asterisk is also an indicator that the kernel is busy. So once this cell finishes, the asterisk will be replaced by a number, as you see here. And the number corresponds to the number of cells that have been run since the last time you restarted your kernel. So that gives you a very general idea of how Jupyter Notebooks are implemented on Terra. I see we're already fairly past time. And I think it's going to take a couple more minutes for everyone's notebooks to finish. So I'll end by pointing out that this last section, or I'm sorry, the second to last section of this notebook, section 7, which is entitled Save Sample Metadata and Update the Data Table. These are the code cells that will modify the information in the data table inside of the workspace, which is what I was showing you earlier. In this particular tutorial, you might not notice this happening because the outputs of all of these have already been completed and are already a part of the public version, because the outputs to this notebook are actually used in the subsequent batch workflow. So we already have those outputs in place. If you want to prove to yourself that it's really working, I would scroll down to this cell, the one right before step number 8, and then you can do something like change this label trivially somehow. And you'll notice when you get to your data tab, so I'll go ahead and show everybody where this all now populates. I'll just close the notebook by pressing this X. I don't know why it doesn't want to close. That's okay. We can always just click on that as well. So I just clicked on the name of the workspace and it took me back to the dashboard. And I'll go over here to the data tab to point out where all of this stuff can be found. So the sample set is the thing that's actually created by those cells that I was just pointing out. So that label that I mentioned was my ASHG Terra analysis. And if you were to change that label in any trivial way, you would, and run that code, you will create a new row over here. So, and once you do that, you'll be able to use this sample set to launch against different types of workflows. And so this is just a quick preview of the next section, but this is what we'll do in the following hands-on section. We'll actually take this sample set and we'll open it with a workflow. And you can do that either from the Workflows tab or from the Data Tables tab. So I'm showing you here how you would do it from the Data Tables tab. You would select the data and then you would go to your Workflows section. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a break right here. I know we're set to come back at 1:30. So I'll open the floor to any questions, and thanks very much for listening.
So we are in a break right now. I will let us all take some time. But before we all leave, please join me in thanking the speakers this morning, Beth, Louise, and Anton. Please feel free to unmute yourselves.